Russian airstrikes are becoming deadlier with each wave. Military analysts in Kyiv say Ukraine's defenses are straining as US-supplied Patriot systems run low on interceptors. With no time to restock, cities are left exposed.
Sanctions have consistently remained one of the most forceful instruments utilized by the collective West to constrain Russia during its military campaign in Ukraine. Since Vladimir Putin initiated the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, an astounding total of 21,692 sanctions have been enacted against the Russian Federation. Yet despite this unprecedented pressure, Russia has discovered numerous avenues to circumvent many of these punitive measures, particularly those targeting the lifeblood of its economy, oil and gas exports. The primary vehicle for this circumvention is what has come to be known as the Shadow Fleet, an expanding armada of unregistered, often decrepit vessels operating under foreign flags. These ships continue to transport vast quantities of Russian fossil fuels across international waters, enabling the Kremlin to generate the revenues it desperately needs to sustain its war in Ukraine. The Shadow Fleet has emerged as one of the most vital components of Russia's economic resilience in the face of international sanctions. But the tide may be turning. Ukraine has become increasingly aware of the strategic implications of the Shadow Fleet and has started to mount an aggressive and sophisticated campaign to dismantle it. Precision strikes are now targeting these vessels, causing severe damage and operational paralysis while avoiding outright destruction that might provoke greater geopolitical backlash. Chuck Farah, writing for the Kiev Post on July 5th, explored the unfolding covert campaign. In his detailed analysis, Farah reveals that Ukraine has chosen not to go public with its operations. This decision stems from the sensitive nature of the strikes, many of which occur in international waters, or even in proximity to territories far removed from the direct conflict zone between Russia and Ukraine. While official silence prevails, the evidence of Ukraine's involvement is mounting. Farah states that Ukraine's operations have targeted Russian-owned oil tankers that operate under flags of convenience, an age-old maritime practice used to disguise ownership and evade regulations. These vessels, often aging and poorly maintained, represent the arteries through which Moscow's war economy receives its oxygen. The strategy Ukraine employs is multidimensional. By focusing on specific components of these vessels, most commonly their propulsion systems, Ukraine is able to neutralize the threat without sinking the ships. This not only cripples the transport capacity of Russia's Shadow Fleet, but does so in a manner that avoids mass casualties and limits diplomatic fallout. The scope of these attacks is truly global, ranging across the Black Sea, the Baltic Sea, and the Mediterranean. Of these, only the Black Sea is a direct theater of the ongoing war. The other attacks signify a shift in Ukraine's military philosophy, an embrace of global asymmetry and warfare. Among the most striking operations Farah outlines are 5 key attacks. The first came on January 28th, when the Sea Charm, a tanker registered under the Marshall Islands, was traversing the coast of Turkey in the Black Sea. A suspected Ukrainian naval drone delivered an explosive payload, tearing a 3-foot hole in the hull and rendering the ship's propulsion system non-functional. The vessel was left adrift. Though Ukraine never formally acknowledged the strike, the intelligence precision and tactical execution point strongly to Kyiv. This strike signified a strategic message to Moscow. Ukraine can track and engage Russia's illicit logistics far beyond conventional war zones. Following closely, a second operation was executed on February 4th. The target, Grace Ferrum, a vessel sailing under the Liberian flag, docked at the port of Tobruk in Libya. Farah notes that Tobruk functions as a critical node in the sanctions-evading oil network operated by Russia. A drone strike, once again suspected to be Ukrainian, inflicted catastrophic internal damage, disabling the propulsion shaft and requiring extensive salvage efforts. The Grace Ferrum had previously visited Russian ports, linking it to illicit activities and further highlighting the effectiveness of Ukraine's intelligence-gathering capabilities. A third mission unfolded on February 15th, this time in Italian waters. The Seal, a ship registered in Malta, was docked in the port of Savona Vardo. A pair of coordinated explosions rocked the vessel as it prepared to unload cargo. Investigations later revealed the ship had transported Russian oil to the European Union on at least 3 occasions earlier in 2024. Evidence pointed to explosives being placed within the hull, likely by Ukrainian operatives who had gained access to the ship without detection. Farah posits that this level of sophistication could only be achieved with a combination of real-time tracking, insider intelligence, and special operations capability. In a further escalation, Ukraine struck a 4th vessel, the Koala, later in February. This ship, under the flag of Antigua and Barbuda, was stationed at Luga port, a critical Russian oil export hub in the Baltic Sea. The assault resulted in the complete failure of the ship's propulsion and engine systems, leaving it dead in the water. Unlike previous attacks, this strike occurred well within Russian territorial waters. Ukraine had now demonstrated that it could penetrate even the most secure Russian infrastructure nodes. Then came a temporary operational pause. During the spring of 2025, Ukraine was entangled in diplomatic maneuvering involving the United States and potential ceasefire talks. Reports indicate that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky showed openness to a 30-day ceasefire, which prompted Washington to briefly suspend and then resume military aid. These negotiations, however, ultimately failed as Putin repeatedly rejected the ceasefire proposals. During this time, Ukraine withheld further attacks on the Shadow Fleet, possibly in hopes of diplomacy prevailing. By June 29th, the gloves were off. Ukraine launched its 5th known strike, targeting the Villa Mora off the coast of Benghazi, Libya. Sailing under a Maltese flag, the vessel was critically damaged in an explosion that obliterated its steering and propulsion systems. The ship remained afloat but entirely non-operational. The modus operandi, again, pointed unmistakably to Ukraine. The Villa Mora had become another casualty in Ukraine's campaign to economically strangle Russia's war efforts. These 5 strikes reveal a consistent and deliberate strategic pattern. Ukraine appears to have launched its Shadow Fleet campaign in early 2025, combining high-level intelligence gathering with surgical operational execution. The goal is clear: cripple the ships, disrupt Russian logistics, and avoid direct attribution or international escalation. By leaving ships afloat yet useless, Ukraine is sending a multifaceted message to Moscow, to the crews aboard these ships, and to the broader international community. What sets Ukraine apart is its willingness to act where others hesitate. Western powers like the EU and the US have enforced sanctions, but stopped short of taking direct physical action against Russian ships. Ukraine, constrained by fewer diplomatic entanglements, has taken the enforcement into its own hands. In May 2025, the EU added 189 vessels to its blacklist, bringing the total number of restricted ships to approximately 350. Ukraine, likely leveraging this publicly available data, identifies high-priority targets for action. The significance of these operations lies in what they attack: Russia's ability to fund its war. The Shadow Fleet has been pivotal to sustaining Russia's oil exports under sanctions. The Geopolitical Monitor outlines how, after the 2022 sanctions wave, Russia invested heavily in building and expanding this fleet. Most of these ships sail under foreign flags and engage in deceptive navigation practices to avoid detection, including route manipulation and AIS spoofing. According to the Kyiv School of Economics, Russia has poured an estimated $10 billion into the Shadow Fleet since 2022. By March 2025, the fleet had grown to roughly 400 ships. These vessels are responsible for nearly 70% of Russia's seaborne oil shipments and 89% of its crude exports. The figures have only continued to grow. From April 2022 to April 2025, Russia's crude shipments surged from 719,000 to 3.077 million barrels per day. Oil product exports similarly jumped to over 929,000 barrels daily. On July 3rd, a Pravda report highlighted that the fleet has tripled in size since 2022, now ranging between 300 to 600 ships. Alarmingly, around 40% of these vessels were bought from European sellers. Most are aging, between 20 and 25 years old. far exceeding the 13-year average lifespan of standard oil tankers. But Russia continues to use them as long as they can float and carry cargo. The financial impact is monumental. Between February 2022 and June 2025, Statista reports that Russia generated $610.34 billion from oil exports. Gas brought in $186.6 billion, and coal added another $93.22 billion. Though not all of it directly funds the war, a substantial portion does. With war expenditures nearing $1 billion per day, this revenue has become a vital resource for sustaining the Russian invasion. Every ship that Ukraine disables is one less transport route for Putin's fossil fuel profits. Each operation depletes Russian revenue, hampers logistics, and strikes a psychological blow. Ukrainian strikes also serve as a warning to maritime crews supporting illicit Russian operations, sowing fear and uncertainty among them. More broadly, these missions underscore Ukraine's excellence in asymmetric warfare. Facing a far larger adversary, Ukraine has adopted unconventional tactics: drones, guerrilla operations, cyber warfare, and now sabotage of oil logistics. Operation Spiderweb in June 2025, involving over 100 drones targeting Russian airfields, demonstrates how far Ukraine's capabilities have advanced. In a National Security Journal entry from June 13th, analysts emphasize that Ukraine has developed a full-fledged guerrilla campaign targeting Russian infrastructure, supply chains, and economic assets. The Shadow Fleet strikes are part of this broader strategic doctrine. Ukraine's ability to adapt, evolve, and strike globally is redefining the rules of modern conflict. Though the Shadow Fleet is far from defeated, Ukraine's campaign is yielding real consequences. It forces Russia to spend more on ship repairs, replacements, and maritime security, costs it can scarcely afford. Moreover, Ukraine's operations have extended the theater of war beyond national borders. From Libya to Italy to Turkey, Ukraine is striking Russian assets with pinpoint precision. This transformation in Ukrainian strategy reveals something crucial. A smaller, under-resourced nation can offset traditional disadvantages through innovation, intelligence, and asymmetrical engagement. As Ukraine continues its strikes, the cumulative pressure on Russia's economy and logistics may turn the tide in a war that has defied expectations for over 3 years. For deeper insights into Ukraine's drone innovations and how they enable operations like these Shadow Fleet strikes, be sure to watch our special report. And don't forget to subscribe for continued coverage of Ukraine's evolving battlefield tactics.